Quyen, yeah, thank you. One word like Madonna. That's going to be an abstract thing for the people online to hear the first thing I say when I come up to you. Hi, folks. Welcome. Welcome to the Anvil Centre. My name is Patrick Johnstone, and I am, as of recently, the Mayor of New Westminster. I do want to start by acknowledging that we are on the lands, unsurrendered and unceded lands of the Halkalilan-speaking peoples. New Westminster is unfortunately too close to the beginning of a true reconciliation journey, and we are spending a lot of time in our city right now doing a year of truth where we are learning and reconnecting ourselves to the stories of this land. And we recognize in our city that colonialism purposefully disconnected people who lived on this land from the stories that told us about this land. And so we're doing our work, and we are learning to reconnect again, and we thank the people whose land we're on. I want to thank you here for this. I didn't expect I was going to be the first person up, so I was going to get swept into this, but here I am sweeping other people's into it. I am excited to be here. I'm excited that New Westminster is once again part of the Capture Photography Festival. This continues a tradition, we've done it for a few years, of putting thought-provoking, storytelling, sometimes unsettling images in public spaces around New Westminster to engage our community in a discussion, the discussions that only public art can bring. And I want to thank and congratulate Rebecca Bair for this piece, Curled Mapped. It's actually an interesting marriage of this two purposes of this building, or two of the purposes of this multi-purpose building. One is that we are an art center where people can come and engage in and enjoy art. And we're also a place where the city's archives and museum are. And so this piece actually brings those two things together. I hope that was the intent, but here I am explaining the artist's intent to the artist before the artist has. Thanks. I love it. I love the piece and I am, my undergrad is in geography, and I am, this came from sort of a lifelong love that I've had for maps. I was before I became a totally normal adult, I was a strange child in that my favorite book as a child was not a Dr. Seuss tome. It was actually my dad's old Rand McNally Atlas. And I, as a child, would sit for hours staring at those big pages and looking at those maps. And I was fascinated by the physical landforms, but I was also fascinated by how we divided those landforms up and how it was something that I spent, honestly, hours of my childhood looking at. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I, maybe more recently than I should admit, that I was able to recognize the stories that weren't told by the maps in that old Rand McNally Atlas. The history of colonialism around the world has given us these clear, straight lines that cut across these wrinkly landforms. And it doesn't really tell us the story of how those lines are drawn or by whom, or the people who actually did the drawing of those lines. And in the archives on the third floor of the Anvil, we have a lot of maps of the city. And they all demarcate these clear squares with the names of settlers and far-off colonial agents. And they tell one history of this place. But they don't tell the truth of this place. And as the City of New Westminster engages in this year of truth, we are trying to uncover the histories of this place that belong to and are told by Indigenous people. But we can also be reminded that those aren't the only truths of the history of this place that are obscured by those straight lines we have on the maps. So I hope this work will draw eyes, but I also hope it's going to lead to conversations in the city, even the ones that make us a little bit uncomfortable about the history of this city. So I want to thank Capture, I want to thank Rebecca Bair, the artist, and I want to thank our art services people and archives folks in the city who made this thing happen here in the Anvil Centre. So I don't have any other script than that, other than my next step is to welcome Quyen to the stage to take us on to the next step. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mayor Johnstone. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here on this lovely, is it sunny out still? Yeah. And all of our live streamers as well. Thank you for joining us. I just have a quick few words. The City of New Westminster's public art program is administered by art services staff who provide leadership in the development, management, and stewardship of public art for the city. The public art policy has actually been around since 2012. It was identified as a need by really the really truly engaged arts community here in New West as early as 2008. So, and since the adoption of the policy in 2012, the city has installed many temporary and permanent art installations throughout the city. In 2021, with the guidance of our Public Art Advisory Committee, staff initiated a review of our policy to ensure that as we move forward, the policy is informed by current leading practices in public art and aligned with key city policies and priorities such as reconciliation, equity, and social justice. So the revised policy that we have now that Council adopted provides a clear foundation to create a bold, diverse, and inclusive program. And at the end of last year, in 2022, we selected a team of consultants to lead the development of the public art plan. So the public art plan that is in development will provide a clear vision for the City of New West and set direction for the public program for the coming years. The plan will support opportunities to share the city's history, diversity, and its journey towards reconciliation while supporting the interests and practices of artists engaged in public art. Rebecca Bair's work is a reminder that we need to be self-reflexive and to decolonize in order to develop and share a more fulsome understanding of our city's history. It has been a pleasure working with Capture this past year to develop this project, and I want to thank Emmy Lee Wall, Chelsea Yule, Sarah Wang, and the rest of your team for their hard work and your support for this project. I want to thank the selection panel members who were part of this project as well. To my colleagues at the city, there's way too many of you to name, but it's been a lot, a full year. And our advisory committee members, past and present, for their advocacy, advice, and their guidance around our public art. And I want to congratulate and thank Rebecca for this artwork, for encouraging a critical examination of the city's narratives, and for participating in tonight's dialogue. We're looking forward to it, to hearing your thoughts and the conversation with Erin. Thank you, Erin, for agreeing to participate in this event as well. So I'd now like to invite Emmy Lee Wall, the Executive Director of Capture, to come up. She is also the curator of this project as well, to say a few words. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to a talk today with Rebecca, whose large-scale site-specific installation titled Curl Mapped is installed on the facade of this amazing building. This public art project is an important part of the 2023 Capture Photography Festival. Before I introduce Becky, I'd like to acknowledge a few key people who made this project happen. I want to thank Quyen from the City of New West for her collaborative spirit in realizing this project, as well as Chelsea Yule, Capture's assistant curator, who coordinated many of the moving parts. We owe a debt of gratitude to Erin Brown-Osterman, who welcomed us into the archives and spent time with Becky there. She was a big part of laying the groundwork for this project. And I also want to extend appreciation to Sarah Hoang, who's navigating the Zoom, I think. She's our CD Assistant Curator of Engagement, and she worked behind the scenes to support this event. So just a bit about Becky. Becky is her multimedia practice explores representation and identity through abstraction. Her work celebrates Black plurality and often uses the sun as a collaborator and hair as a meaningful signifier of personal and cultural care. Her work, Curl Mapped, for me, is such a poetic representation of absence and is a powerful reminder that archives and maps are the result of subjective determinations that decide whose histories are documented, preserved, and celebrated as part of any official record. Becky has exhibited her work at the Polygon Gallery, the Vancouver Art Gallery, the Surrey Art Gallery, the West Vancouver Art Museum, the Broad Arts Foundation, and the Image Centre at Toronto Metropolitan University. And in 2021, she was runner-up for the Lind Prize, and in 2022, she was a Portfolio Prize recipient. I really want to thank Becky for being here tonight and also for being an absolute joy to work with. You've been incredibly thoughtful and positive throughout this entire process, and I really want to congratulate you on your powerful and evocative public art installation.
Ooh, speak in front of people, that's weird. Thank you, Mayor Johnstone. There you are. Thank you, Quyen, and thank you, Emmy, for your gracious introductions. I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm presenting to you and that the Anvil Center is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Halkominum-speaking people, specifically the Kaikalt Nation. I work in Surrey, the overlapping territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Stolo, Tsleil-Waututh, Semiahmoo, Katsi, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, and Kaikalt nations. I currently live on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, otherwise known as Vancouver. I never acknowledge these nations passively, as I hope to be a less extractive settler and a more caring and knowledgeable human in support of Indigenous sovereignty. My most recent thoughts about this are rooted in the premise that these lands actually belong to no one, but rather belong to themselves, active and alive and with agency. The gifts of these teachings I have recently received tell me that these other nations, or the Indigenous nations, were and continue to be the caregivers and stewards of these lands. I'm committed to being a better and more thoughtful caregiver in allegiance and solidarity with the sovereign Indigenous nations of Turtle Island and beyond. So hi, my name's Rebecca Bair, but you can call me Becky. Someone the other day, I was joking with David, my partner, that someone the other day said that Becky doesn't suit me, so I'm having just a minor existential crisis at the moment. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you all for coming and for joining me. It feels really cool to be doing it on the first real warm Thursday, and I'm gonna try to be quick. What I have to share with you is kind of a lot, but I think it's worth it. But I also want to get to bring Erin up onto stage with me, and I really hope that we also get to see the work in the sun before it goes away for the evening. Just before I dive in, I would like to extend my most sincere gratitude to the Capture Photography Festival for this opportunity, to Emmy, Chelsea, who's not here, to Sarah. It's been a pleasure working with you to make this work come to life, but also to bring this talk together today. To the City of New Westminster staff, to Quyen, to Rebecca, to Rob, and of course to Erin. You're all absolute delights, and it's been so much fun to be able to learn from and with you. I also want to reiterate my gratitude for everyone here. I have family online, I have peers and colleagues and friends, so this feels really special. For those who don't know me, I'm from Ottawa, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. I do air quotes when I say Canadian, because I think that it's a debatable title, but Canadian Jamaican. And I received my Master's in Fine Arts from Emily Carr University in 2020. Since then, I've worked as a practicing artist, as an educator at Emily Carr University of Art and Design, at the Ontario College of Art and Design University. I've worked as a consultant, as a mentor, and as a co-director. My most recent work is with Solid State Community Industries, many of my colleagues are here, where we build workers' co-ops with racialized and underserved communities under the guise of solidarity economics. Most budding for me is my work my team and I are doing at the Black Art Center in Surrey, an artist-run center meant to support, foster, and encourage Black creativity and community through the recognition of Black possibility and plurality. We're set to open our doors in May, and you're all more than welcome to our opening. So if you want more information on that, please let me know, let my team know. As a final note on this slide, I'd like to say that what comes next is not a lecture. I'd like to position this talk as more of a seminar, as an opening to contemplate and to speculate collectively. It is not prescriptive, it is not all-encompassing. My understanding of truth is such that it can never be complete. Our work is to shift, to learn, to integrate, and to adapt, To present truths without the capacity for nuance is limiting and in many ways counter-human. So there's none of that here today. I've chosen to start this presentation with an image of the cover of my thesis. It was written as a glossary in the footsteps of Eve Tuck and C. Ree's text, A Glossary of Haunting, written in 2013. Footnotes in my thesis ask you to jump from page to page, back and forth, with gaps and leaps and isolated chapters. My abstract, in part, I won't read you the whole abstract, but in part, reads, For We Are the Children of the Sun is a thesis project which aims to utilize abstraction and non-figuration as methods of representation for Black women on Turtle Island. Through a personal contemplation of identity and ancestry, symbols such as hair and the sun function as connectors to the African diaspora and its many manifestations of Blackness. It goes on a bit, but I'll stop there. The main themes in my practice are that of Blackness, specifically my experience as a Black woman. It's about abstraction and non-figuration, photography and installation. It's about hair, as a symbol and opening for connection and care. It uses alternative mark-making materials such as shea butter as a cultural signifier, and I work through collaborations with the sun, which I describe as being my connection to ancestry and more broadly to the Black diaspora through our melanized skin. The title of my thesis, For We Are the Children of the Sun, was borrowed from an excerpt of an essay written by Zora Neale Hurston titled Characteristics of Negro Expression. In the essay, she discusses the elements and nuances of Ebonics in the southern United States. She writes that the stark and trimmed phrases of the Occident seem too bare for the voluptuous child of the sun. This quote has directed most of my practice, if not my entire practice since. To me, it symbolically uncovers and empowers the Black body as a dynamic source of creation, of light, of energy, and of beauty. The concept of the children of the sun is an ode to Hurston. It's an ode to Black resilience, creativity, and diasporic community. That said, I'm always wary of representations getting too close to being monolithic or singular. And to answer that question, how do you represent or visualize the voluptuous child of the sun? I think I'll try to answer for the rest of my life. In my work, I try to address the I promise there are images coming, by the way. There are photos. In my work, I try to address the misrepresentation of Black femininity by pushing against or interpreting trope. Those which I am most considerate of are the hypersexualization of the Black woman's body, the stereotype of the angry, savage, or dangerous Black woman, and most complexly, that of the caregiver. We're told over and over again from many different sources that our value is in what others can extract from us. We are also told that our passion is scary, that our refusal is disrespectful, and that our joy is without class. So as I try to push against trope, I question the efficacy and utility of figuration. I'm a formally trained photographer, so my work always starts through the photographic medium and then shifts from there. So you could probably imagine how much I want to just lean into figuration and actual literal documentation. My use of figuration is then to ensure that subjectivity, embodiment, and self-referentiality do not allow for further exploitation and do not reinforce trope. I'll add that trope and stereotype becomes trope and stereotype when they become the measure by which we judge and see the world. It doesn't mean that they aren't always true or people can't embody those things. So again, nuance. This all brings me to my use and interest in abstraction. As a photographer, I'm really interested in how we can abstract. What is that gesture? What does it mean? And what does it look like? Where does it actually come in? To me, abstraction is about possibility, plurality, dynamism, and difference. Okay, last text, and then I promise pictures. And it's a long one. There are going to be quite a few quotes today, so please bear with me. But I think that they're all useful and great references if you're looking for some reading to do. This one is by scholar and cultural critic Philip Bryan Harper in his book, Abstractionist Aesthetics, Artistic Form, and Social Critique in African American Culture. He contextualizes abstraction as being broad, so much so that it's all around us, that we are living through abstraction. At the end of this quote, he says, "The abstractionist's work invites us to question the naturalness not only of the aesthetic representation, but also of the social facts to which it alludes, thereby opening them to active and potentially salutary revision." So to me, that means that everything is abstract. So what's next? How do we emphasize that abstraction? What becomes of the Black woman's body in response to this notion of living in and through abstraction? Well, I make works like this, like Reach and Coil, which bring in my most consistent themes of the sun, hair, and photography, which uses language to insinuate closeness and distance through connotative and denotative definitions, which uses scale to ask of a viewer to immerse themselves, to walk the distance, and to take time. But it also points to its constructedness. It recognizes its distance from reality, particularly in the two different angles of the sun, and it insists on its metaphor and its codification. Installed on an underpass at Théâtre Cercle Molière in Winnipeg as a permanent public art installation, it's like you're seeing the sky on the other side of the structure through the work. It's asking the viewer to look up and to be intentional. Reflective material makes you part of it and reinforces your distance from it. It points directly to its incompleteness and to its abstraction, as it doesn't occupy the entire surface. It is just a sliver. Collaboration with the Sun, made in 2019, also takes up that sense or that sensibility for abstraction. Made with shea butter and charcoal, this drawing or mark-making piece is a call and response between myself and the sun, my first real collaboration with the sun. As I applied shea and charcoal mixture onto the plexiglass in circular motion, the sun came in to melt and shift it. The sun, its presence or lack thereof, determines how and when the work is made, over time, in response to its environment, in collaboration with me, abstract and in many ways unpredictable. Further and even more intentional collaboration with the sun happens with the making of cyanotypes, a practice of extending photography and working through play and iteration. This work is thinking more intently about the trace, the suggestion or alluding to presence, and to the documentation of time. Again, it is abstract as it holds true the use of reality to reinforce its constructedness. These works are of light, just like blackness. Writer Essie Aduyan recorded a lecture series titled Out of the Sun on Race and Storytelling as part of the CBC Massey Lectures of 2021, an incredible 6-part series. Again, if you're looking for something to listen to, I got readings, podcasts, what do you need? I got it all. In episode 1, titled Europe and the Art of Seeing, Aduyan begins to elaborate the complexities of representation and story making through images. She contextualizes this work by referencing Art of War by Sun Tzu, who in turn describes how an army should use the sun to their advantage. Illuminated places are preferable to dark places, she says. It's a sun versus shadow debate. In this conversation, we begin to situate ourselves relative to light. That which emits light and makes it hard to see, that which translates it. Who is seen and who is unseen? In my work, blackness is the sun, but it's also of the sun. Thus, blackness is light and shadow, that which is not containable, that which is only avoidable in complete darkness, and even then it is there. This strategy of enabling the shadow is particularly important to my practice when it comes to hair, as it is in this work, that which a stranger reaches for without my consent. I mean, it's gorgeous, but it's for me to touch. The shadow is trace. The work is about visualizing the untouchable as untouchable. In episode 2, titled Canada and the Art of Ghosts, Essie opens up a particularly interesting idea for me. Who gets to be a ghost? Who can we or do we allude to? Who is immortalized through ghosthood? I can't help but think about it in terms of representation and art, and of course abstraction. Our ancestors are ghosts, with stories worth remembering, abstracted through time, our Black bodies too often the only trace of their having been. Pressed was the first time I made a monoprint. I used inked extensions, which were previously installed in my hair as braids. The work references hair straightening and processing, processes which in turn are quite literally a flattening and a shifting towards quote-unquote whiteness and Eurocentric standards of beauty. This work is also, however, about choice, and I hope my sister is still on because this is an important moment. My beautiful, wonderful, spectacular, genius older sister, Lissa, once said to me, and it was a long time ago, I have since very much learned, and I paraphrase sister, that no one, not even you, and she was talking to me, has the right to tell a Black woman what to do with her hair. I think that is a not so gentle and absolutely essential reminder to all of us. Press then becomes a portrait in and of itself, but also a trace. The figure has become, as Essie Aduyan says, a ghost, an insinuation, a suggestion. I do have, as Mayor Johnstone, I have a fondness for maps, and I always have. Recalling the many road trips I had the privilege of going on with family over the course of summers in very familiar places and absolutely foreign lands. Having a map was essential to those experiences. Situating ourselves and knowing where to go and what's next was made possible through the bird's eye documentation of land and space. Maps are positioned as all-seeing and all-knowing, as objective guides. They prescribe how to, where to, who to, but they must be seen and known as incomplete. Maps are curated perspectives, too often of colonial and settler views. They are the documenting of a moment in time with labels that name, holding as truth only that which is right now or has been. Static, only changing from absolute to absolute, they are insufficient. They miss big chunks of subjectivity, particularly that which is known through Indigenous lives and knowledges. The in-between is missing. Where is the nuance and where is the care? The abstraction of maps is in the eye of the beholder, but I don't think that they have the capacity to hold ghost stories. Untitled takes on much of that sensitivity of maps and of geography. It is actually extended by the sensitivity of topographical, geographical, and ecological considerations and relations. In its flatness and blackness, there is infinite possibility and depth. The glow that illuminates its contours suggests fire and emits light. The gaze looks at you and away, confrontational and dismissive. The scale towers over you, and you cannot hold it. The binary to possess versus to be possessed is in question through visualizations like this one. There is a generosity to myself in the space left for self-determination here, so much so that I often think of this piece as separate from me, even though it is a self-portrait. There is agency, the right to sexuality, codified cultural symbols and signs, particularly in the hair. The edges of the work become topographic, hair as situating heritage, ancestry, place, and subjectivity. It is a mapping of me as an individual and the collection of individuals who made me possible. I am their ghost. Hair maps are registers. Sometimes my work takes on the portrayal of other ecological or geographical considerations, particularly that of waterways. They become entries and opportunities for imagining moving through and in between. They respond to your movement, flowing and shifting. They integrate your presence, ghostly, abstract, and partial. There is definitive ecological consideration with Skylight, my thesis project. This work focuses on the idea of collaborating with the sun as it shifts and changes in response to its environment throughout the day. The piece is comprised of 4 printed panels on Tyvek measuring about 20 feet by 13 feet. The hair canopy rests at a variable 20 feet in the air. The idea with this piece is that people can be immersed in the experience. this photo canopy mimicking the shade of leaves and fissures of light experienced beneath the tree. The viewers offered the invitation to look up, invited to engage with the subject matter and to spend time. I think there's another image here. Oh, there we go. This work was about representation. It was about taking up space. It was about identity, about finding myself within that, all those considerations, and it was mostly about care. It was about being present, and of course it was about trees. Curl Mapped is a first site-specific and responsive work for me done in this particular way. It takes into consideration all of the sensitivities of abstraction, hair, the sun, and places it here, or out there, securely and speculatively within a map. As I planned this installation, I researched the history of place with the help of Rob and, of course, of Erin in the archives. We spoke of Black history here and could note the movement of Black settlers into New Caledonia, or New Westminster, around the 1850s. They came to the mainland following the gold rushes and created home. In the archives, I was told of a select few. We know of a handful of Black porters and of Thomas and Elizabeth Forrester, who owned land in the area. There are newspaper clippings and select documents. So where did all the Black people go? Where did they end up? We know that they traveled north, assisted in the creation and development of what we know now as this province, and like many unwelcome guests, they tended to the lands to establish some shape or form of home. They would have walked the streets, made communities and businesses. They would have owned land and traveled the waters. Their rich contributions, the ways in which they were part of settler narratives and inevitably colonial violence, but also their expansive abilities and interests, their successes in everyday lives are undocumented by these archives. Erin and I spent several hours together exchanging. She learned about my practice and approaches, and I learned about her interests and methodologies, the history of New Westminster, and how they relate to this work. The archives were described to me as being a site where a host of joy can be found and just as much sorrow and heartache. We found commonality in our desire to care for histories unseen, and we were able to move into the archives with that care in mind. We explored the aisles in search of traces of Blackness, but were unable to find any real documentation in the form of images, nor could we find substantial references. We could recognize together the many shelves filled with visualizations of white families, businesses, and the many maps they would have created to mark their existence over time. So this quote by sociologist and cultural critic Stuart Hall is one often used by my good friend and great influence Nia Lewis when discussing Blackness in the archive. Every image that we see is being read in part against what isn't there. It makes me think of the violent removal, the intentional reductions, but it also makes me think of the ghosts, those who will understand when I omit, when I codify, and when I suggest. The ghosts that thrive in the shadows and bask in the sunlight. What is marked is important, but I would say that what isn't might be even more so. Erin shared lots of documentation with me, but I was really stuck on this map of the City of Westminster in 1862. It's colorful and dynamic and really bright, and I printed it off a few times so that I could feel like I was holding it. What continued to capture my attention was its clear and precise documentation of neighborhoods and the categorization of the city. With a good amount of contextual work having been done, I knew that Black history specifically were not documented on these maps, and I knew that there had to be a way to rectify it. And I was, of course, reminded of James Baldwin, as you are when you do this kind of work, and how his words might help us understand how to move forward. We've loosely established that maps are documentation of place and time. So if James Baldwin says that people are trapped in history and history is trapped in people, how might we make space for people in maps? And so I played, and I always play. I keep extensions and hair trimmings to iterate and to try. And I always use hair to make those iterations. I soon realized that the hair could be integral to the piece, not separate, not isolated, and not superficial. The map could be human, and the human could be map. So I brought in these images, and again, working through photography first and morphing and shifting from there. In their combining, I thought of the ways that my hair leaves traces everywhere. The shea butter and the oils that are left behind are hauntings, they are reminders, they are lingerings. In Eve Tuck and C. Ree's A Glossary of Haunting, they describe the significance of how we hold the memory of atrocities, particularly colonial atrocities. They insist that the violent omission, the passive killings, cannot be erased. Instead, they haunt. They say that haunting aims to wrong the wrongs, a confrontation that settler horrors hopes to evade. They are lingering, reminders and openings for imagining. They are ghost stories. They are unending. In my interview for Capture's catalog with Emmy, I noted that it felt like there was a ghost in the space, worth remembering, notable in presence, and yet which could not be touched or located. They were ghosts, and they are hauntings. I would like to think that my representations of Blackness, and more specifically, Curl Mapped, are about light, and thus inherently about shadow. The sun makes the work cascade into the space, separate from the map. The curls can bounce, and they can play, and they can occupy. They glow, and they morph, and they shift in the sun, and they cast shadow, lingering, extending, reaching. They are abstract, they are of me, they envelop you. I hope that viewers in turn will spend time, investigate, and want to know. Somewhere in between the hauntings of Eve Tuck and C. Ree and the ghost described by Essie Aduyan sits my work. In broad daylight, a reminder, a proposition, a possibility, a reopening. Thanks. Erin is going to join me now. Oh, I can speak like this, that's fine. Hi, Erin.
Hi.
This isn't on. Oh, maybe it is. There it is.
Oh, wow. Are we on? Good. Hey.
Thanks for sitting with me.
Thanks for sitting with me. Hi.
Can you introduce yourself super quickly?
So I am, as you know, I am Erin Brown-Osterman. I am the archivist for the City of New Westminster. And I am a newcomer here to New Westminster. I've only been working here for a little over a year. Mm-hmm. And I have popped around both what we call Canada and the United States for a really long time. I was born in the United States. And yeah, that's me. Lots of different experiences, lots of different interests, all sitting on the stage now.
Yeah, thanks. When Erin and I were doing the research in the archives, we became really good friends really quickly, like really quickly. Boom. We spent several hours the first time that we were in the archives looking and searching, and you were showing me what you did know at that point. And we, several hours without food, without water, we were just playing and trying and looking. We were searching. We were really searching. But I know that when we did that, you had only been here for a few months. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So we pulled out drawers and looked through things. We pulled boxes off of shelves and opened them and looked through things. We pulled books off and looked through pages and pages of things. But throughout that entire process, I was very cognizant of, I've only been here for a few months. Mm-hmm. I don't know all these stories. I don't know all the things that are in these pages, documented in these shelves, all of those things. And as someone who works in a memory institution and is aware of the stereotype of the archivist, that's something you gotta know. That's something you just gotta be able to go, oh, stories of such and such, stories of blackness, that's box this, shelf here, file this, item here. And I didn't. And it was terrifying. It was scary. And I felt this pressure, but this responsibility to do the best by you and what you were looking for, but this pressure to represent what is in the archives or what isn't in the archives as accurately as possible. And so that was not just how I was feeling when we were working together, and we had met once before, and it was terrifying. And when we went and we spent the day together, it got progressively less terrifying, but it was still just this really scary experience not to know and have that indexical knowledge of all of these things.
Yeah.
And in those early days, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do this, and very quaky, and there was a part of me that kind of wanted to run back to the adopted home that I had been given with the Tecumloops in Kamloops, BC, and just be with them. And I know what I'm doing there. It's still scary, hard work, but I know what I'm doing. And I think one of the things that has eased that quaky fear was our day together, and working and being given the grace by you to, as a researcher, to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Let's look, let's see. Here, let me give you resources to see what you can see, and let's talk about it. That grace that you gave me for being unsure and not having all the answers, just weight off my shoulders.
I didn't know people could know the archives that well, so I wasn't prepared to put that pressure on you at all.
But don't you have that image of like an archivist or like a wizened old gentleman and they just know, and you come and knock at their door and you say, oh, please, sir, may I have some information? And they're like, well, perhaps. And they stroke their long beard. And they say, and it's like, well, here is the exact manuscript you are looking for. Here is the exact box you are looking for. Like, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm not a wizened old man with a long beard.
You're not.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. And how would you say that your experience of the archives has shifted since then? Because you've been there, that was almost a year ago now.
Yeah.
I'm looking for all the faces who would have been around about that time,
It's grown. I still don't know everything, so I still don't have a long beard. But there are stories that I know where to look for them now, and there are stories where I can say, I still don't know where to look for them, but I'm more confident in saying, I don't know, let's look. And also, what can we do about this? What can we do now? What can we sort of organize our way into? One of the things that I bring with me from my practice is that I'm sort of a systems thinker. And for me, systems, large, like government structures, societal structures, but also structures that exist in things like archives, are things to be listened to, sat with, which you helped me be able to do a little more comfortably. But those systems have ebbs and flows and eddies to them. And I think now where I'm at is a place where I'm much more confident saying, Becky, which I think the name suits you. But Becky, other community members, far and wide, come into the archives. Hey, let's look at the archives in sort of different ways. What way of looking at the archives makes sense to you? I talk with my hands a lot. So.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And okay, so in that, I know a little bit about your actual interests, like beyond these specific archives, but your actual interests in the archives and what led you to be an archivist. Can you tell us a little bit about your interests in these spaces?
So, yeah, I came to the archives sort of in a roundabout fashion. I studied language, not just in school, but just constantly, languages, multiple languages, and language as, again, a system of organizing information. That's what made sense to me. But also language in terms of rhetorics and ethnographies and just different ways of communicating knowledge through language, through languages, different languages. I'm also an avid sci-fi fan, which some people may know around here, but looking at how systems of organizing knowledge work and how they don't work. And when I got my degree in archives, it was more about understanding these documentation systems.
I'm going to keep asking Erin questions because I don't want to speak too much more, and I think Erin is super smart and wonderful, and it's a great opportunity to share. Actually, maybe I'll only ask one more, because then I don't have to force you to keep answering. We've spoken, Erin and I have spoken many times about the archives and what they do, and our research and how we approach these spaces. I'm by no means an archivist, and my work doesn't often engage with archives, except for personal archives, potentially. And something that we talk about quite often in different ways is how the archive is a utopia. And that's something that I have spent a long time like with you, and after we speak about these things, kind of thinking about and wanting to further kind of sort in my brain. So can we offer to the room that complexity or
Oh boy.
that puzzle?
Yes. And while you're spending a lot of time with me thinking about this and outside, this is something that is sort of always going through my head. So this is a abbreviated and probably very meandering answer, but my conceptualization of archives is that they are utopic spaces, as you alluded to. And there are several different considerations that come through that. One consideration is the utopic aspect of promise, of beautiful, well-organized, civilized spaces, but also just the dream of the future. And what we deposit in the archives today informs our future. What has been deposited over 100 years informs us today, as your work very much speaks to. So the archives are a manifestation of a dreaming of the future. And that's very bright and very beautiful. But utopia also has its dark sides, because within a utopia, you can't encompass everything. And it depends on whose utopia you are speaking of. But a utopia does not capture everything, cannot capture everything. If it captured everything, it would not be utopia. And so one of the utopic aspects of archives, and as we often conceptualize of them now, is that they don't hold all the stories. That stories have been, I want to be careful about the use of the word intentional, but that stories have been intentionally omitted. And what I mean by that is that the creators, because an archives is a created entity, the creators of archives are intentionally depositing materials within it that are representational of them. And depending on who starts the archives and what society looks like, there may be blinders on that other ways exist, that other groups should have space in the archives. And I think that's what we found, is the ghosts of Blackness are, and I would say the ghosts of other ethnic groups as well, are a reflection of a group having the privilege, the very real privilege of time, of space, of wealth and resources to take things that they were very passionate about and set those things aside and say, I want this remembered for the future. Not every group has that. Not everyone has that. So it's, and that plays into that utopia.
Yeah.
And the last thing I will say about this, because that was really long, is that we have to think, when we're thinking of archives as utopic places, we have to think, do all the stories belong in these places? I mean, we can do our best to redress the absences that have been made historically and fix that moving forward. But we do have to ask ourselves, do all the stories exist in this place? And is that possible? And I would argue that that's not possible. I don't know all my own stories, let alone all your stories or this audience's stories or any of all the stories. I don't think that's possible to know all the stories. So when we approach the archives as having all the information, that's just not true.
Yeah, can't happen.
Can't happen, won't happen.
Yeah.
But we can do our best, and we can try and live up to this utopic ideal and this utopic dream.
So you feel hopeful for the archives?
I do.
Good.
I do.
I love that for you.
I love that for me too, since this is where I'm living now.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll stop there and turn to see if anyone has questions.
I can bring a mic to you.
Congratulations, Becky, and it was so nice to hear from you, Erin. I think we are in a moment in Vancouver right now. You, Naya, Carice, me, to an extent, where we're really looking at the archive. And I just want to know, kind of like when I was looking at the visual archive of like Blackness in like Western art history, I kind of went in with the idea that like, oh, yeah, the worst thing I would see is something that was like stereotypical. And like I was actually, what's the word? I was actually excited to like see that, because on the one hand, like stereotypes for a lot of Black people has been like the one way that we have been seen and like actually marked our agency in like the worst of ways. But it also like really just throws things in your face like, oh, wow, like these people really thought of us like this. And just encountering an absence is like a completely different feeling, in the sense that like, you're like, oh, so they didn't even bother to like document us at all. And I just want to know, both of you, like, how did you feel like kind of encountering the absence? Like, were you angry? Were you sad? Like, how did that make you feel, essentially?
Thank you for your question, Maroti.
You're you're going first.
Okay, I'll go first. I think we felt almost frenzied, and that's probably why we kept looking for hours and hours, like, oh, it has to be here, you know, like in denial. That's probably the best way to say it. And I think since it's easy to understand that there are personal archives and there are other kinds of archives that hold these rich and incredible stories that actually an institution cannot hold. It's just figuring out the line where personal histories and narratives and archives can be safe and can be held, but also institutional archives do not present history in a way that omits so many. And that balance is weird. So I would say that I definitely felt in denial. I felt, I guess, kind of sad, but we also spoke through the whole thing, and it was a very good experience. But in denial. I'm going to stop there. I think that's how I would describe it.
Yeah. I would say frenzied is a good word. But I would also say part of my training has prepared me for these silences. And I can play off of that frenzied because I had been told, I knew there were these traces. I know there are these traces, but I was talking to a friend today about this and how I think about this. And it's almost like, Where's Waldo? Mm. And you know he's there.
Yeah.
You know, but the longer you go without finding him, it gets you a little frenzied and it gets you a little worked up. Mm-hmm. And the space that I'm trying to make now, and I think is hopefully a more popular movement within archives, is to say, well, this is a community archives as well. It's a municipal and civic archives. We have a mandate and a legal fiduciary duty to do things, but it's also a community archives. And groups throughout New Westminster's history have used it as their personal archives, very rightfully so. Mm-hmm. How can we expand that? How can this be a safe place? So next time the Beckys and the Erins and others of us look through this, we're not searching for Blackness and sort of reading against the grain of records of whiteness and saying, oh, there I am, or there that is, or there's Waldo. Like, the work needs to be making it safe and making it acceptable for it to be there. Mm-hmm. There's no marking as a special aspect. It's just there. It's just beautifully there.
Yeah. I like that you say that too, because we spent a long time in the archives, like moving things and bringing things out and putting them together to try to visualize absence. And try to visualize that feeling. And I think we did it in part, but it was also like, that was a weird experience to figure out how to make that visual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Becky.
Hi, Christine.
And hi, Erin. Erin, I think you already started answering my question, which was about, who creates the archive now? Who gets to decide what goes in the archive? Who decides what's important? Who creates the architecture for that, so that when someone looks at it in 100 years? And so you were talking about popular movement, archive is a popular movement where those decisions could be made by community members. And you pose it as questions you were asking yourself, but I guess my question is now evolving to be, how much work is being done currently to bring about that vision that you have for a community popular archive? So
that's a really good question. And As the archivist, I can speak to some of it. As one member in the city and as a cultural team, I'm not exactly there to answer all of it, but I will say, as the archivist and as the person sitting in the office saying, what do we have? Who is the community? I want the community to feel very comfortable saying exactly what you said, exactly what we have heard here today, that I don't feel comfortable in this space. That's an important thing to hear. And then I say, I want to listen, I want to hear, I want to understand, and I already understand some of why that discomfort exists, but what can we do? But it's sort of, strange is not the right word, but it's the word I'm gonna use. It's sort of strange because I look at this as not saying we will redress this problem by everybody in this room, give me your records, give me your archives. That is not the way to fix this. The way to fix this is to build comfort, to do things like this, to have outreach, and to very plainly say, these communities were left out. The Black community was left out. To very large extent, the Chinese community was left out. The Indigenous community was left out. The Sikh community was left out. Communities of color were left out. And I don't have all the answers, but I know I have to ask, what can we do to do better now? What can, and part of that is that privileging aspect that certain groups, white groups, had the ability to set their things aside, to be seen as what this place was. But also just what can I do as the archivist and as the custodian, and that is an important word, the custodian of these things, to make it more comfortable.
It's a great experience in the archives with Erin. I don't want to invite people on your behalf, but it's a great experience. So if you have research to do.
I'll invite people on my behalf. Come on in. Come on in. Everybody is welcome, and everybody is, I am here to sit down with anybody and say, what is your experience? I'm not here to tell you what your experience is. I'm here to say, what is your experience? And if it's a crappy experience that was edited, then let's see what we can do to redress that.
Where do I start? Thank you, Becky. Your work's so important, always relevant, and I'm so pleased I'm going to be passing this on the street on a regular. I'm a resident here in New Westminster for many, many years. And I speak from a position as a creative researcher who has approached the archive long before your time. Super chilly experience, actually quite negative, and somewhat the antithesis of the outcome of that work for me. I had to really struggle to gain access to anything in what felt like a good way. So it means a lot to hear that acknowledged and to hear that there's a fundamental shift potentially that's happened in the city or happening. And I want to, Maroti, I think, that current moment, but this is a long moment where people have tried to approach archives and struggled in these spaces. So yeah, beautiful. And part of me that is struggling a little bit with the conversation because I think about, and I think I'm just this evolving question that's just moved through three of us now, so I'm not sure how much I can add to it, but I think about the archive sometimes, the problem of it is that it helps us distance ourselves from what are contemporary racist and colonial conditions that we live in every day. And I'm wondering the specificity of what it means to be a part of an archive or to contribute to an archive. I learned a lot about business ownerships or public art or whatever it is, but I don't think the average person understands how do we become a part of an archive? What could we shift in our everyday practices? And I think if we're so lucky, 50 years, 100 years, to still be around and to be able to look back on our archive in a material way, what's changed? So what is the contemporary Black experience in New Westminster now in the archive? And this is not all on you, to be clear, and you don't even have to answer this. I guess I'm asking the room full of city folks, what is different for Black community here? We are very visible. We're multiple generations here. I see folks every day, and that's partly why I live here. So I'd really like to know, what's so different? 50 years from now, is it really going to be this contemporary archive? Is it not going to be Becky 50 years from now still moving around boxes with Erin 50 years from now to try to figure that out? And again, not necessarily a question for you, just holding space for that loss and really that harm that I personally and I think other people have experienced here as a resident of New Westminster.
Thanks, Cecily. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely don't think that I can answer that question. But I so appreciate the opening to bring that into this space, but also to speculate a little bit. We have to be thinking about the implications of that work that needs to be done. Is it going to be done or not? And it's kind of a point blank answer, or question rather. And I so appreciate that. I cannot answer though.
I can't answer it either. I wish I could. And I'm very grateful for the holding space for that question. I can say I'm damn well gonna try. That's why I'm here. But part of this, let me backtrack a second and say, when I interviewed for the position, another terrifying experience, because what I knew of New Westminster, what it was, white. And I had been working for a First Nations group, and it was terrifying. I'm just going to keep using that word. It was terrifying, the thought of leaving that group and coming to the whitest part of the Lower Mainland, possibly. I wasn't sure. And I have been pleasantly surprised. I have been pleasantly surprised by the reception I have had from my colleagues as well as the community. And my responsibility is to see that in 50 years, we're not just shifting boxes and looking desperately, and to make sure that we can do this work.
Mm-hmm. Are there other questions? Okay. You're good to keep going?
Yeah, maybe one or two more.
Okay. Sarah, do we have any online questions?
Hey, girl.
Hey, Carice.
The work looks so good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this talk, by the way. Erin, what you talked about, Utopia and the archive, it was really, I'm thinking a lot about my work, so thank you for that. I have a question about abstraction in your work, especially thinking about Black people's relationship with photography historically, right? We were often kind of portrayed not having agency being the subject behind the camera. So now we're seeing Black people in contemporary photography reclaiming that space and being very intentional in the ways that they're representing themselves in front of the camera and being the photographer. But your work is really interesting because it kind of abstracts that and I think goes against that. Yeah. And I was wondering if you get kind of questioned about that a lot in your practice. Do people ask you you should just be in front of the camera? They want that from you? Because I get that a lot with my work, and I think there's something to that, and I've been thinking a lot about that. So,
yeah.
Before you answer, I'm going to say thank you for that question, because I was going to ask a question.
Oh.
About that, so, yes.
Okay, nice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carice. Do I get asked that question a lot? no, because I think I skirt around it a little bit in that all of the images are of me, but only the kind of intentional portions that I want people to see. As you were saying, like that super intentional framing, that super intentional representation. What parts of me am I prepared to offer through this like documentation? So I think that it is what people expect of my work, but it's not told to me. People don't ask me directly, and please don't, because I won't do it. But there is, I mean, my practice is kind of all over the place, as I showed through these slides. It's very interdisciplinary. The framing is so different all the time. So much so that I think that I do leave space for figuration, and I do leave space for my like representation. And it's funny because I think people often inch towards the works that are of my like body or of my like direct figuration and representation. But that makes me want to make works like this even more, you know, that push back against that. Like, it's not, I mean, it is of me and in many ways about me, but it's also not. And I don't owe you my image. And so I won't give it to you. If I can avoid it, I will. Thank you for that, though. It's a complicated issue as Black photographers, I think. Because I think, as I said, the instinct is also to do that, you know, to just document and to be in front of the camera. But I think it's also important to push against it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a question online that's asking both Becky and Erin, what are you both excited about, and what's coming up immediately next? What are you working on?
All kinds of things. The Black Art Center in specific. But in my practice, lots, all the time. Lots of play. I spend my summers playing and collaborating with the sun, so lots of that.
For me, I think we have some artists in residency. In fact, I know we have some artists in residency. I said that wrong. And I'm getting to work with some of them. So more art, more collaboration with the archives. That's super exciting. And then every month I get to talk about sci-fi in the archives, and that's really, really exciting for me. I nerd out hard, and you're all invited to that. And from sort of the more traditional archival perspective, what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis is working on the systems we have in place. The key parts of couple of the key parts of being an archivist are arrangement and description, and that's how we move things forward. That's how we know what's there, and we build up these systems, and I'm working every day to make sure that the arrangement and description is robust and representative and not dependent on me to be the gatekeeper for it. Again, not an old dude with a long white beard, and that's the way archives have been for so long. My practice is making sure that even if I'm not here tomorrow or a year from now, y'all can come in and you can see yourselves, and you can be in the space, and you can do the work that you need to be done, that needs to be done, that you need to do and that needs to be done. And that is another one of those utopic aspects of archives, is working for a better system of representation, working for a better way of providing access, because these are your materials.
Hi. Becky, thank you for your work. I actually have a question for you.
Yeah.
I live in New Westminster, and as I was looking at the piece being installed, it came to my attention. At first, I thought that it was an allusion to the history of fires in the city of New Westminster, and it felt like a map consumed by flames. So I don't know if you looked at this in your research when you were looking at the archives, but the history of New West is the history of a city in search of reconstruction. I've only been here 3 years, but I kind of got curious about the history of a great fire that took place in 1898 and consumed the entire city of New West, at least what is now part of the downtown area. And now we got the Pier Park fire in 2020 in the midst of a pandemic, and it's sort of like recreated this kind of situation. So in your work, when you talk about memory, when you talk about alliteration, I was curious when you also mentioned the way you understand abstraction. I'm wondering to what degree you also considered the history of New Westminster as a whole when you were conceiving your piece, keeping in mind that New West has been destroyed constantly in terms of shape and also in terms of, I guess, the social fabric of the city has also been like pretty much like destroyed and built and rebuilt over and over. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. That's a really good question. Did I take into consideration? I would say yes. I took into consideration the history of place, but I was most interested in the Fraser, in the water, actually. So I'm glad that you bring up fire because I was most interested in water. I kept going back to how people got here and traveling on the Fraser and coming through and it being literally right there, you know, it's right outside of these, or a block outside of these windows. So I spent most of my time thinking about that in the absence of Black representation and documentation in the archives. I also will say that I think I was also very hesitant to have the work be defined by colonial history. And that's a funny place to be in because I recognize that Blackness being here is part of colonial history, and I recognize all those, I recognize as I'm saying it, that it's kind of ironic or whatever, and I didn't want to spend too much time fixated on trying to hold those histories, which I think are fantastic, and I think that the break allows for them to be here, right, and to be part of this work beyond me, because I again, this work isn't of me, or it's of me, but not representing me. Anyways, but I think that it leaves space, the crack, the space is that space to hold those stories and those memories and those histories that we're not all necessarily privy to, but those who are can fill those gaps in certain ways, but not entirely. You know, you can't mend the image, but you can fill in some of those gaps with those pieces. So, does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. I was exactly thinking about the gap. Yeah. Like we are in need of filling in that gap. Yeah. And I think we need to, but I also think we don't need to. And I think that comes back to what Cecily was saying, in that I think that we can contribute to the archive, but we have to also recognize it as an institution. The institution has a responsibility to give us or recount and hold history in as complete a way as possible. But it doesn't always mean that here in this place, the materials will be available to mend, to fill it entirely. And I hope that we can think of the archives in that way. As you said, they can't hold everything. We have those little slices and pieces in our own subjective ways and in our personal archives and in our own spaces to fill those gaps. But the archive can't and shouldn't, I don't think, hold all of those pieces to be able to fill it entirely. And that feels like a good opening to a good opening. It feels like a good space or something. I don't know. I'm going to keep going to sit in, to stay. Thank you.
So it's 6:25.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we still want to be able to go see your work.
Yeah, let's
and
do that.
enjoy some refreshments. But speaking of fires, are there any burning questions you have?
Nice.
Final
Thank you, Quyen.
call? Anyone? No? Okay. Well, join us in the lobby, and we have some refreshments, and hopefully the sun is out, and we can see the shadows as well. So thank you, everyone. This was wonderful.